The day started like any other. The sun was shining down over the calm waters, a light breeze drifting across the lake. For me, this place wasn't just a scenic view, it was a part of my life, my sanctuary, and more importantly, my property. I had worked hard for years to build myself up, and owning this lake was one of those milestones that reminded me of just how far I had come. But apparently, not everyone knew or cared about that fact. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. I had taken my boat out for a short ride just to clear my head and enjoy the peace before the usual noise of weekend crowds. When I docked back at the edge, I noticed her standing there, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed high on her face, and that look that screamed self-importance. Anyone who's ever dealt with a Karen knows the look I'm talking about. Before I could even step off my boat, she barked at me. "Excuse me? Can't park your boat there? This area is for residents only." I stared at her for a moment, confused, and then I let out a small laugh. "Ma'am, I live here." She didn't even flinch. She whipped out a clipboard from under her arm like she had rehearsed this 100 times. "Well, if you live here, you should know the HOA rules. Boats can't be docked here unless approved by the association. You'll need to move it immediately." Let me pause for a second. This wasn't the first time someone tried to pull rank on me. But there was something about the way she said it, like she owned not just the dock, but the lake itself. I could already feel my patience wearing thin. But instead of snapping back, I smiled. "You know," I said slowly, "that's interesting. Because last I checked, this lake doesn't belong to your HOA." Her lips curled into a smirk. "That's where you're wrong. This community pays dues for lake access. If you're going to keep that boat there, you need permission. Otherwise, I'll be filing a violation report." I almost laughed again, but instead, I leaned on the side of my boat and just looked at her. The arrogance, the confidence, it was almost entertaining. She had no idea who she was talking to. See? What she didn't realize was that her entire fishing club, her neighborhood's so-called crown jewel, and the HOA's proudest bragging right, all existed on land and water that belonged to me. I didn't just live here. I owned the lake, every square foot of it. And in that moment, I knew things were about to get very, very interesting. She stood there like a guard dog, clipboard clutched tight, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't move. Instead, I calmly tied off my boat and stepped onto the dock. Her eyes narrowed, as though me standing there without bowing to her authority was a personal insult, sir, she said, in that sharp, clipped tone people use when they're trying to assert dominance. "I don't think you understand how serious this is. We have strict HOA rules about boats. You need to submit paperwork for approval before you just dump something like this in our community lake." That word stuck with me, our community lake. I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. "Your community lake." She nodded firmly. "Yes, this lake is part of our HOA property. We manage it, we maintain it, and we decide who gets access. If you want to use it, you have to follow the rules." End of story. Now, most people might have tried to argue with her, maybe even back down to avoid drama. But I've lived long enough to know that folks like this thrive on intimidation. And I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. I smiled. It's funny, because I've never once seen the HOA mowing around the lake, or cleaning it, or stocking it with fish. That's strange, don't you think? Her jaw tightened. She shifted the clipboard under her arm and said, "Look, sir, I don't make the rules. I enforce them. Kana, I'm telling you to move your boat. If you don't, I'll be contacting the board immediately. We can fine you, revoke your access, and if necessary, take legal action." The way she said it, you'd think she was laying down the law. But to me, it just sounded like empty threats. I leaned closer, keeping my voice calm and even. "Ma'am," I said, "I don't think you quite understand who you're talking to." She gave me that smirk again, the kind that says, "Oh, I've dealt with people like you before. You'll fold." But I didn't fold. "You see," I continued, "I'm not just some guy docking his boat without permission. This lake, the one you keep calling your community lake, I own it, every inch of it. The water, the dock, the fishing rights, all of it belongs to me. Which means you and your HOA don't have the authority to tell me where I can or can't park my boat." For a moment, her confidence cracked. Her mouth opened like she was going to say something, but no words came out. I could see the shock ripple across her face before she quickly tried to cover it up with a laugh. "That's ridiculous," she scoffed. "No one can own a lake. The HOA manages this property. Everyone knows that." I pulled a folded document from my jacket pocket, the deed. I always kept a copy handy, just in case. I unfolded it slowly and held it up for her to see. "Everyone may think that," I said, "but everyone is wrong. The deed's in my name. I bought this lake years ago. So, if anyone's violating rules here, it's not meets your fishing club. Because technically, they've been trespassing on my property all this time." Her face went pale. That was the moment I knew this was only the beginning. Word of what happened spread faster than wildfire. By the time the sun set that same day, half the neighborhood seemed to know about my encounter with Karen at the dock. And sure enough, the next morning, I received a neatly folded letter, stuffed into my mailbox. It had the HOA's logo plastered across the top, with all the usual legal-sounding nonsense. Notice of violation, failure to comply, immediate action required. I shook my head and laughed. They weren't wasting any time. The letter claimed I had illegally docked a watercraft on HOA property without prior approval, and that if I didn't remove it within 72 hours, I'd be fined $200 per day, plus additional fees. At the bottom was a line in bold, underlined 3 times. "Failure to comply may result in legal action." Now, I could have just ignored it, but that wouldn't have been as fun. Instead, I made copies of my lake deed and mailed one directly to each member of the board, front and back, highlighted, circled, with a sticky note that said, "Next time, do your homework." 2 days later, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood 3 people. The HOA president, a man with a stiff suit and stiff smile. Karen herself, arms folded like a chihuahua, ready to bite. And another board member who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Good afternoon," the president began, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We'd like to discuss the violation notice we sent you." I leaned on the doorframe. "Sure. Did you get the documents I mailed you?" His smile faltered just a little. "Yes, we did. However, there seems to be some confusion. While you may, in fact, hold a deed to the lake, the HOA still maintains jurisdiction over how it is used within this community. That means you are still subject to our rules." Karen nodded aggressively beside him. "Exactly. You can't just claim you own the lake and do whatever you want. That's not how this works." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because last I checked, owning something means I decide what happens on it. Not you, not the HOA, me." The second board member finally spoke, her voice softer, almost hesitant. "If what you're saying is true, does that mean the fishing club technically doesn't have your permission to be on the lake?" Bingo. Karen spun toward her like she'd just committed treason. "Don't you dare encourage this nonsense. The fishing club is a part of this community. We've had rights to that lake for decades." I pulled out the same folded deed I'd shown Karen before and waved it gently in front of them. "Funny thing about rights, they only exist if they're legally granted. and I don't remember signing anything that gave your club permission to use my lake." The president's smile was gone now. His jaw was tight, his eyes flicking between me and the paper. "This isn't over," he muttered. "We'll be contacting our attorney." And with that, they turned and marched down my porch, Karen muttering something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. I closed the door behind them, but I knew this was far from finished. If there's one thing I've learned about HOAs, it's that they never admit when they're wrong. They double down. They dig deeper. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. This one wasn't from the HOA directly, was from a law firm downtown. Big, bold letters across the top read, "Cease and desist." I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages. It was the usual legal jargon, stressed up to sound intimidating. Accusations of interfering with community rights. Claims that I was obstructing HOA recreational access, and demands that I cease harassment of the fishing club. But one line stood out, and I couldn't help but laugh. They actually wrote, "The HOA, as rightful steward of the lake, reserves all rights to regulate its usage." Rightful steward. I was their big legal hammer. I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. This was going to be fun. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, a sharp woman who didn't take nonsense from anyone. She had been with me through several property acquisitions. When I explained the situation, she chuckled. "So let me get this straight," she said. "They're threatening you for enforcing your own property rights." "Exactly. Then we'll give them a reality check. Don't worry, I'll draft something up." 2 days later, a letter went out from my attorney's office. It was short, simple, and devastating. It laid out in black and white that I owned the lake in full. That no agreement existed granting the HOA or its fishing club permission to use it. And that if they continued trespassing, I would have no choice but to pursue damages. It ended with one perfect line. "Any further attempt to restrict my client's rights will be considered harassment and subject to legal action." The silence that followed was deafening. For nearly a week, I heard nothing. No knocks at the door, no angry letters, not even Karen's shrill voice across the street. It was like the entire HOA board had gone underground to regroup. But then came the bombshell. At the next community meeting, word spread that the fishing club was in danger of being shut down. The club had been one of the HOA's biggest selling points. People moved into the neighborhood because of lake access. They bragged about it in their brochures, used it in their marketing, and even collected extra dues for maintenance. Now, for the first time, residents were realizing that the entire thing had been built on a lie. The HOA never owned the lake. They had no authority over it. And worse, they had misled the entire community. I wasn't at that meeting, but my phone lit up all night with texts from neighbors. "Is it true you own the lake? Karen's losing her mind right now. The president looks like he's about to cry." Apparently, when the truth came out, the room erupted into chaos. Some people demanded refunds. Others shouted about suing the HOA. Karen, of course, tried to spin it, saying I was power tripping and ruining the community. But the deed didn't lie by the end of the night. The fishing club's future was hanging by a thread, and the HOA knew they were standing on shaky ground. I walked down to the dock early one morning, just as the sun broke over the tree line. The lake shimmered like glass, calm and quiet, untouched by the usual chatter of the fishing club. In my hand, I carried a stack of freshly printed notices, formal, legal, and undeniable. Each notice read, "Effective immediately. All unauthorized fishing and boating activities on this lake are prohibited. This property is privately owned. Any further trespassing will result in prosecution." I posted one on the dock, one at the boat ramp, and one at the community entrance where they love to hang up their flyers. By noon, everyone in the neighborhood knew, and by evening, my phone rang. It was the HOA president again, his voice tight, almost desperate. "Look, can we discuss this? The fishing club is an important part of this community. Maybe we can negotiate some sort of arrangement?" I let him talk for a while about how they could pay me a small lease fee, how they could draft new rules that included me, how we could smooth this over for the sake of the neighborhood. But when he finally paused, Kai said, "Only this, you don't get it. You and your board have spent years pushing people around, making them believe you owned something that was never yours. You tried to threaten me with fines, lawyers, and rules that didn't apply. And you made the mistake of thinking I'd roll over like everyone else. I'm not negotiating. The fishing club is done. Pack it up," he sputtered, tried to recover, but I ended the call. That weekend, quote, I watched from my porch as the fishing club dismantled their gear. The dock that once bustled with anglers was empty. The chatter, the barbecues, the laughter all gone. The HOA had lost their crown jewel, all because of their arrogance. Karen was the hardest hit. I'd see her storming around the neighborhood, fuming, muttering to anyone who'd listen about how I'd ruined everything. But the truth was, she'd done it to herself. If she'd just minded her business, none of this would have happened. The irony? After the club shut down, several neighbors came up to me privately, shaking my hand and thanking me. Turns out, not everyone loved the HOA or the fishing club. Some had been fed up with the extra fees, the noise, the favoritism. I had done what they wished they could have done all along. I'd stood up to the board and won. And as for me, well, I still had my boat, my peace, and my lake. Every morning I'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the water that belonged to me. And I couldn't help but smile. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about a boat. It wasn't even about the lake. It was about standing your ground, about showing people that entitlement has limits and bullies lose their power. The second you stop being afraid of them. So when Karen told me to move my boat, she thought she was putting me in my place. But in reality, she was setting herself and the entire HOA up for the biggest loss of their lives, and me. I got to keep what was mine all along. The lake, the boat, and my peace. So if there's one thing to take from this story, it's this: never underestimate the person you're trying to push around. You might think you've got power, but real power comes from truth. And when truth shows up, there's nothing an HOA, a clipboard, or even a Karen can do to stop it.